Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I hope everybody's doing well, no matter where they're at in the world. So, I'm going to be talking about using food as medicine. And within using food as medicine, I think we have several concepts that we have to come into and keep in mind. First, the concept of using food as medicine is ancient. We have ancient civilizations in Iraq and Iran and Africa and China and Asia and Greece that have been using food as medicine really intuitively since the beginning of civilizations. And it's only through current progress that we have lost this connection with understanding that food truly can be of medicinal use, and it has been used extensively throughout history for medicinal properties and uses. So we have these cultural applications that are at play that really are indicative of teaching people how to use food as medicine and use it under an umbrella of lifestyle medicine within like the culinary medicine connection. The thing with using food as medicine is it's one piece of the puzzle. When we start talking about our evolution and how we've evolved to being where we're at today, if we're all in our computers, right? We're sitting and having a conference where we would once be together. We are dealing with a global pandemic. We have lost connection to the land that we're living on. A lot of us have transplanted all over the world. We tend to not know where our food is coming from. If we do know where our food's coming from, we're not quite sure how it was packaged or who touched it or what were the growing practices involved in it. We have lost that sense of connection with growing our own food and then how to produce our own food and how to prepare our own food. Throughout the years of being an educator, I've realized that there's a lot of people that love the concept of food as medicine, but when it comes to the application of applying food as medicine, it's very difficult when you don't know how to prepare the beans, the blueberries, and as researchers and as educators, it's very easy to say just eat more fruits and vegetables because that's how we prevent diseases. But that can be lost without the application within the culinary medicine field. So when we look at our evolution, we were all once hunter and gatherers. We were very closely connected to the earth and to the cycles and the rhythms of the earth. And that means that indicated what kind of food we were able to access and how often we were able to access those foods. So we have evolved to this place in current society where we have shortening of telomere lengths and we have chronic disease risk higher than it's really ever been before. And we have to look at the genetic predisposition to this of what happened from being hunter and gatherers and being very closely connected to our communities and to the earth and to the food that was being produced. How did we get to this place where we're very isolated, we're very lonely, we are lacking the understanding of how to prepare our own food, we lack and a lot of times the knowledge of even where that food was coming from. I have taught around the state where I live at, and I cannot tell you the number of times I've had people say, I'd say, "Where did you get your hamburger from?" And they would tell me a fast food restaurant without recognizing that there was a cow involved in it. Or asking, where do blueberries come from? And they'll say, in the cereal box without recognizing that there's a bush involved. So there's this major disconnect that we've had within how do we sustain ourselves? How do we provide nutrition to ourselves and really nourish ourselves? And that feeds into this bigger framework of lifestyle medicine because it's not just the nourishment of eating more fruits and vegetables, it's also the nourishment of connection and of lifestyle medicine applications. So, Dr. Dean Ornish in the 1990s really showcased that we have the capability of turning genes on and off. We look at this further within epidemiology and epigenetic research, and in that epigenetic research, we're able to see that through our lifestyle choices and our nutritional choices, we do have the capability of mitigating what genes turn on and off. And this is really of importance for our survival and our progression through evolution. Because if you look at what's currently happening globally, you see that there's an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, pulmonary diseases, diabetes, cancers are on the rise. respiratory infections, and now we're dealing with a global pandemic of COVID-19 as well. So you are seeing that there is a rise in what could be considered chronic diseases and therefore have some role within the prevention of them. Food as medicine is the answer to this conversation. When we start using food as medicine to support our immune systems and to mitigate the chronic inflammation that is rampant in our world at this point in time, all we have to do is look out of our offices, right? Look at what's happening socially, look what's happening financially, economically, look at what's happening within health. We're bombarded by stresses that our predecessors have not had to handle in the same way that we have. We now are all Zooming for all of our meetings and our conferences and having a decreased interaction with one another. And that isolation and that loneliness compounds inflammation in our body. So there's a bigger conversation that's happening here of how has our evolution changed? We've moved more towards convenience. We have changed our work hours, especially now that we're remote, from being an 8 to 5 work day or an 8 to 4 work day into now we're up all the time and we're accessible really anytime and everywhere, right? Our workload has increased. The demands on us have increased, especially mama here and I have a child. And so teaching at home at the same time, like there's an increased workload that happens. We have this lack of culinary skills that has really surpassed us as we've had this agricultural revolution where we no longer are cutting up our own butternut squash. We're buying squash that has been cut up for us and it's packaged so that it's easier to prepare because we have less time to prepare our food. We have over a reliance on allopathic medicine where we say, hey, I'm experiencing headaches, I'm having trouble sleeping. What can I take for that without looking at the integrative and the mind body connection to it, the functional medicine application? There's just a growing disconnect in a lot of ways between our health and the health of the planet, the health of our communities, the health of our mental and our emotional well being. And we're seeing this extrapolated when we start looking at the chronic disease risk and chronic inflammation that has increased. And so when we're talking about inflammation, well, I really want to make sure that we are focusing in this conversation on the inflammatory markers that food as medicine would target. So within food as medicine, what we see happening is that there are specific fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, and funguses that will target inflammatory markers. These inflammatory markers that are listed are ones that we see chronically elevated, especially in populations that are dealing with chronic diseases. And so we know that we release C-reactive protein as a precursor to inflammation and to stress responses. And when we are constantly stressed, our bodies have a harder time navigating and returning to a state of homeostasis around these constantly produced cytokines and inflammatory markers. So the inflammatory markers really can degrade and infiltrate our immune system function. And especially during a pandemic, that's very concerning of how do we keep our immune systems fully functioning so that we are able to decrease the amount of inflammatory markers that are in circulation and also help prevent our bodies from enduring and incurring chronic disease risk and symptoms of it. So we have to have this conversation around chronic stress and how it impacts our immune system function. And I think this conversation, and honestly, this conference has never been more pertinent than it is today when we are dealing with COVID-19 and the reaction of being under, I clearly live in the United States. There's been a lot of social unrest that's happened here this year and in years previous too. And then we have had the election that's happened. The amount of stress that is happening for us and humanity at this time is really very large. And the way that that impacts our mind body physiology has significant impacts upon public health and chronic disease risk. So when we look at the immune system, we really have to address the fact that we're looking at how do we support the immune system functioning fully while paying attention to the fact that we are being exposed to stressors that we maybe had never have, and we have higher inflammatory markers circulating really chronically than we have had previously. And that's indicative of not only how are we handling those stressors that we're exposed to, but it's also indicative of what are the food choices we're making. If we're eating processed foods and fast foods and highly saturated fatty foods and high sugar foods, the really quick foods, quick calories, these foods tend to increase inflammatory markers in our body, and they are not there to actually help decrease it. They're not alkaline in nature, and they're not reducing the acidic response load upon our systems. So we have to look at the role food plays within this myriad of stress, inflammation, and cellular damage. Because what we're talking about within Foodist medicine is how do we mitigate and how do we reduce stress responses that are happening at a cellular level, at our mitochondrial level, at a level where our DNA is being switched on, our genes are being switched on, or they're being switched off. So we have to connect to food in a different manner. And Foodist medicine is not only a culinary and a dietary choice, it's also a philosophy where we look at these cultures that have embodied using Foodist medicine throughout ages, and there is a deep sense of connection with where's my food coming from, how was it prepared, what was my role in that preparation, who am I sharing the food with, what does it taste like, what is the aesthetic of it, how does it look, how do I interact with the act of eating? And this is very different than the unconscious, mindless eating that all of us really fall victim to throughout the days. So within immune system function, we're going to look at how do we support our immune system using Foodist medicine. And what we're really looking at is telomere lengthening. We know that we have telomere shortening due to our lifestyle choices that are happening at this time in our society, right? We are working more, we're eating poor quality, nutrient quality foods, we're sleeping less, we're having more isolation and disconnection. So we have these adverse effects impacting telomere lengthening, which is impacting longevity. We have NRF1 and NRF2 being impacted, and these are going to be really important for activating our mitochondrial function, where what we're talking about within Foodist medicine is really how do we support the immune system and decrease inflammation at a cellular level. That means that we're looking at NAD as well, which is responsible for cellular aging. So we're wanting our cells and our mitochondria to really function as optimally as possible. And that's going to come through making Foodist medicine choices, but it also comes through lifestyle choices as well. So with the white blood cell count, this is going to be impacted by Foodist medicine choices as well. However, this white blood cell count is really indicative of how much inflammation is circulating. But this one is really important to pay attention to in the sense of how Foodist medicine as a philosophy interacts with lifestyle medicine. We see white blood cell count change through deep breathing, through presence practices, through the acts of gratitude. And these practices were once really a cultural norm for most of us when we were coming together. I'm sure most of you on the call can recount times would you come together with your family and you would eat food together, and there was this gratitude and this appreciation, not only because of being with one another, but also because of the food and the nutrients that you were consuming. So this is where we have this overlap between Foodist medicine and lifestyle medicine that are impacting immune system markers. We're going to see within the research that telomeres are lengthened, that NRF1 and NRF2 are changing, that NAD changes, that white blood cell count increases, that we see the immune system function, we see the mitochondrial function, we see detoxification happening at a cellular level, so that we are actually changing longevity, but also the mental and emotional well-being. Sorry, I got off the slide. So as we get into the research, there's some definitions that we need to be aware of. a lot of the foods that we're going to be looking at act as adaptogens. And these adaptogens are going to be properties that are found in food, typically found within the phytochemicals of the fruits and vegetables and the herbs and the spices and the funguses that we're looking at. They help protect our bodies from stresses. They help mitigate our stress responses, our inflammatory reaction responses. That means that they're helping to stabilize our physiological response system to inflammation. They're adapting to what is the inflammatory marker or the stressor that we are interacting with. Maybe it's binging and eating 12 pieces of pizza and you haven't had pizza in years. Maybe it's going through a fast food restaurant chain. Maybe it's cigarette smoking. Maybe it is getting in an argument with your partner. Whatever those stressors are, the adaptogens help our bodies physiologically respond to reducing the inflammation that happens. They also help to boost our immunity. So they're helping to support that immune system at that cellular and the mitochondrial function. They're protecting us from disease because of that reduction in inflammatory markers. And most of the time, these adaptogens are extremely alkaline. And if we look at the gut microbiome and we look at our chronic disease, the chronic diseases and the chronic disease nutritional choices that we're making, we're typically consuming a really acidic diet at this point in our lives. And so with protecting us from disease, that means we're trying to reduce the amount of acidity that is found within the gut microbiome. So the adaptogens work to help promote a sense of health and well-being. And they're doing this because they are connected with antioxidants. We're talking about fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices, and funguses. They are going to be delivering our largest sources of antioxidants to date on how do we help counteract free radical production, the stresses that we're constantly bombarded by that we can't really escape at this point in our society. So we have these antioxidants that are going to be found really prolifically within fruits and vegetables. And we know that diets that are really high in antioxidants have higher immune system function. They are better able at fighting off colds and viruses. They are better attuned at stabilizing chronic inflammatory marker production. And then they're reducing inflammation at that point in time. So what the diets we're really talking about is returning to those ancestral diets that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, at the slideshow, where we're eating diets that are really predominantly rich in plants. And these plants are going to be filled with these phytochemicals. And so the phytochemicals are known to impact us at a cellular level. They impact cell signaling, they help with oxidation, they help with inflammation that's happening. They're going to be targeting mitochondrial function, and they're really important for this chronic disease risk of how do we reduce the growing evidence that we have more and more people globally that are dealing with chronic diseases that are preventable diseases. So we have to get into using culinary medicine. And this is what leads us into what foods should we be focusing on, right? And this is it's the conversation of the culinary world meets the nutritional world, where the food is really going to be telling us a story. And the food that we choose is telling us a specific story to our specific body needs. And that means that as consumers, we have to be aware of what is it that our bodies need, this intuitive knowledge to what is it that my body's asking for. Am I having chronic migraines? Am I dealing with high blood pressure? Do I have insomnia? Do I have psoriasis and acne? What is it that my body is telling me that is going on? What are the visible and the physiological responses that I'm having? And then use that as a barometer to start exploring, well, what kind of food would support my body and the symptoms that I am having at this point in time? So culinary medicine really bridges this gap, not only between us looking at our bodies from a very intuitive angle, but also to connect us to where is our food coming from. Therefore, how is the earth sustaining itself? How are we supporting food production? Is it happening in an organic manner? Are we exposing ourselves to lots of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and chemical residues that we may not need? How do we detoxify from those? It also helps us connect to this deeper belief that our bodies are capable of being well, and that if we provide them the basic nutrients, that they will be able to sustain this sense of wellness. So we're going to begin our conversation by looking at spices. The first spices I want to look at and bring up are ones that were found pretty readily when we talk about the spice trade and we go back in history and we look at this historical context of using food as medicine. These are food spices that are used in conjunction with Ayurvedic medicine, with traditional Chinese medicine. You see them being used in conjunction with other meals. And so they're used as amplifiers typically to help not only spice and flavor the foods, but they are delivering phytochemicals to the foods and antioxidants to the foods that would not necessarily always enter our diets. And so ginger is one that most people will go, oh yeah, you chew ginger, you eat ginger when you have digestive, which is true. And the phytochemical that we're studying within ginger is going to be 6-gingerol. And this is looking at not only the digestive aspect of how does it ease digestion, but ginger has also been extensively studied for its ability to help with blood sugar stabilization, blood glucose stabilization. There are anti-inflammatory compounds found within that 6-gingerol. There's lots of research that has been that has looked at using ginger as a way to reduce menstrual cramping. There's a lot of research that has happened looking at using ginger also for reduction of migraines and headaches. And there is research that's looking at ginger for its use in arthritis production. So anytime of inflammation that's happening, you can use ginger in the manner of reducing that symptomology. So that brings up the question, well, how do I use the ginger, right? And this is the piece of tying together with food as medicine and culinary medicine. How we use the ginger, there's different applications that can be used. We could talk about using essential oils, and there's research that is indicative of all of these applications. We could look at using powdered ginger. We could look at using fresh ginger and raw ginger, right? The rule of thumb from my research and my perspective is really that if we can get more of the raw compounds into our diets, the better that we are in maintaining those phytochemical compounds and aiding in their absorption. So when we look at the next spice we have got, it's going to be cayenne peppers, spicy peppers, jalapenos, and oh, sorry, I was looking at that. We're looking at spicy peppers, jalapenos, all of these peppers that produce that increased metabolism, that flush in the face. They are going to be looking at the compound capsaicin. And that compound capsaicin is really important because not only does it increase metabolism, it's been shown to help with weight loss. It helps with blood sugar stabilization as well. So it's important for diabetics. There's research that's being conducted looking at using capsaicin for GERD, indigestion. There's research that's looking at using capsaicin for sinus troubles and migraines, also for using it for arthritic pain. There is research that's being conducted with capsaicin right now around psoriasis as well. And then there is a lot of research that's been looking at the role of capsaicin for cancer cell prevention or cancer prevention. And then that's happening because it is working against the cytokines and helping with the detoxification of cancer cell lines, and it's turning off tumor necrosis factors. And so the next spice I want to look at is cardamom. I'm trying to pay attention to the questions coming in so I can stop. What food should we consume for constipation, and what types of food can make us medicine while in illness? These are great questions. Okay, so for the For the illnesses, like what we're really going to be looking at there is going to be more into the berries. And that's because of the polyphenols that are found there in the antioxidants there. And there are some spices and herbs that we'll get to in just a second. And then for the constipation, ginger will work, but that's really going into the realm of funguses and fruits and vegetables because of the fiber concentration. And that is targeting that gut microbiome. So the cardamom is going to be full of flavonoids and carotenoids, and it has terpenoids in it as well. It acts as an antimicrobial and an antiviral. These pieces are extremely pertinent right now while we are dealing with a pandemic. The more we can get diets that are rich in antivirals, antimicrobials, antibacterials into our systems from a food source, the better our immune system is going to be able to function. Right. So cardamom has also been used because it's super flavorful, but it helps with digestion. There is research that looks at it for metabolism, for cardiovascular disease prevention. It acts as an antioxidant. It's working on NKFB cells, and it helps with signaling cancer cells to halt their growth. It is an anti-inflammatory. And that's the thing that you're going to be seeing throughout all of the foods that I'm presenting, is that all of these are acting as anti-inflammatories to help reduce that inflammation load, that chronic inflammation load on our system. Black pepper is going to be one that we want to pair with other spices because it helps to amplify the other spices. We see this happening in research repetitively when you look at research studies targeting turmeric and or curcumin and black pepper. And what we're looking at really is the pepperin, and how it interacts with the curcumin. And there's a binding, a synergistic experience that happens between these two phytochemicals to amplify their antioxidant loads or their auric value loads. And that's the name of what we're really targeting within food as medicine, is how do we get antioxidant loads extremely high to counteract the stressors that we can't avoid, right? So with pepperin, you see it as an amplifier, not only within cardamom, within turmeric, but it acts also as an antimicrobial and an antiviral. And so it has had research on it, specifically looking at it for its use around bronchitis and respiratory infections. It has been known to help with diarrhea, and there is research that's being conducted on it and its ability to impact the tumor necrosis factor as well. And that leads us really into like the star of the show is turmeric. And turmeric is the one that definitely has the highest amount of research, like the most prolific research to it. And when we look at turmeric, we're talking about curcumin. And so curcumin is really being extensively researched. There was a couple of research articles that came out 3 or 4 years ago now that was comparing using turmeric to NSAIDs and showing that turmeric is actually more effective than NSAIDs in the sense that it doesn't have the same toxicity load upon the liver, right? We're able to detoxify easier with turmeric coming into our systems than with having NSAIDs. So there's research that's looking at the safety of using turmeric, and we're within that safety conversation. We have research that shows turmeric can be used for Alzheimer's disease, for stroke victims. It can be used to help improve memory, and it can help with mood enhancement because it's working on the microglial cells. It acts as a chemopreventative, and so it's helping to start apoptosis of cancer cells. And then it also has been shown to help with arthritis and headache pain as well. So turmeric is one of those that if you take anything from this lecture, or if somebody ever approaches you and like, what are the main takeaways of food as medicine? Turmeric is probably one of the stars of the show because it's impacting so many different functions and physiological symptomologies of chronic diseases. I see your question about the synergistic effect of antioxidant from spice mixes and beverages. There could be toxicity in the sense, I think we look at toxicity more so within spice production. Truthfully, if you look at research that looks at toxicity around spices, what you're really seeing is how were those spices brought to market. We have a lot of heavy metal poisonings happening in several of the spices that are used and spice mixes that are used, where you'll find lead and cadmium in in the spices, and that's really because of how were they produced and brought to the consumers. And so that's an area of food safety that needs a little bit of tightening in order to reduce that toxic load, for sure. Thank you for that question. That's wonderful. So herbs are going to be the next area that we're going to look at. And I think herbs and spices are ones that we often overlook. They're the ones that we add into our meals and then we don't really think about, well, how are they beneficial? And so when we talk about the applications of herbs, we're not only looking at throwing them into a stew or putting them into a soup or laying them on a sandwich. I'm also talking about using them in the form of teas, so dried herbs. And we're also talking about using them in the form of tinctures, which would be a alcohol extraction of those phytochemicals. And so they're a very concentrated form of herbs. So the first one I want to look at is going to be oregano. And now oregano is super powerful, and especially right now with us in my hemisphere going into the winter months, and then also with where in the United States, especially where we're at currently within this COVID pandemic, oregano is really powerful because it's an antibacterial, it's an antiviral, it's an antifungal, it's an antimicrobial, and it acts as an antioxidant. It's the phenolic acids that are found in oregano and the flavonoids that are found in oregano that are super impactful for the immune system. So we have research that shows that with oregano, it impacts our respiratory function, it helps with digestion, it can ease headaches, it is also shown to help with insulin sensitivity for diabetics. And then we can use oregano too as a food preservative and for food safety. And there's been research that's looked at that within E. coli and salmonella. So using that to help mitigate the food safety risk that goes along with our current food production. And then, I've got a question. Let's see. Which items would be preferred as food as medicine? And that question about eating without breakfast, that's, some people's bodies function better at that manner, and then other people's do not. I think within food as medicine, if we're looking at the literature around traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda as the foundational of eating breakfast, you see that they suggest small amounts of food, but that's usually followed after having water with lemon and using some sort of a beverage as a detoxifier prior to eating a small amount of food, which would most likely be just plants at that point. In the foods, for food as medicine, this next one is one of the most important. And so that's elderberry. And so elderberry is going to be really important because it helps as an antioxidant. It is so the research around elderberry has been really prolifically looking at its ability to reduce the length and the duration of colds and flus. There is current research that is happening around using elderberry within COVID-19 as a preventative and then also as a treatment when somebody has contracted COVID. You have the cyanidins, the proanthocyanins and the anthocyanins found in elderberries. And this is part of the reason why it's really so potent. You have a lot of polyphenols that are at play. And if we go back to those immune system markers, the NRF1 and the NRF2, they are impacted by how much polyphenol concentrations we have coming into our systems. And so elderberries are really high on their polyphenolic concentrations, making them really pertinent to supporting the immune system. So you have elderberries being shown to help with cardiovascular oxidation, and they also help within acting as an adaptogen. So if we go back again, that adaptogen piece to help reduce the stress responses and the inflammatory responses in our body. They are ones that are going to be typically consumed in a tea and a tincture. And yes, I will absolutely put my email in. It's actually in my PowerPoint, and my email will be at the end and the beginning of the lecture. Absolutely. The next one I want to talk to you guys about is echinacea. And so echinacea is really important because it helps to support the body against inflammatory markers, but also it helps with B cell production. And so it helps with leukocyte changes. And it's been shown really extensively within the research to help with respiratory infections. And it has a concentration of antibacterials in it and antifungals in it. It helps with infections and wounds. Traditionally, within food as medicine, echinacea was boiled down, and with anybody that was dealing with a wound, their wound would have been washed with echinacea because it is an antiviral and an antimicrobial. It reduces pro-inflammatory responses. So we see a reduction happening within cytokines and within tumor necrosis factors and within the epithelial cells. And within that, you have gene changes happening or gene function happening. And so echinacea is a great one to have on hand, especially during the months where you may be getting additionally sick because it's helping to support at a cellular level. Rosemary has been extensively researched for its ability to help with mood, with memory, with alertness, with fatigue. So this is a great one that if at the end of your workday you are struggling thinking of things, having some rosemary, rubbing it in your hands, smelling it, eating something that has rosemary, drinking a rosemary tea, it can help produce a sense of alertness or help you with remembering things. And it also is really rich in carcinoic acid and also these polyphenols. And it has diterpenes in it, which are the responsible parties for helping with the memory protection. Rosemary's also been studied extensively for its ability to help with anti-cancer properties. It is an antiviral. There is a lot of research that shows its respiratory functions and its ability to open up lung cavities. So there's a better ability to breathe. It lowers blood pressure. And so you see there's variations within this research on how is the rosemary being delivered. Is it powdered? Are we taking it in the form of a supplement? Are we drinking a tea? Are we eating it raw? And that brings in this question of how do we apply food as medicine? Is it just the application of consuming the foods, or are we looking at them in forms of functional foods and nutraceuticals? So when we talk about the functional foods and nutraceuticals, this is oftentimes where you see the industry, the food industry changing and adapting to consumer demands. And we have more individuals looking at those original slides that I put up showing that chronic disease risk is increasing globally and wanting to not necessarily rely upon allopathic medicine to reduce or prevent the risk of these chronic diseases. So you see individuals turning towards functional foods and nutraceuticals. The supplement industry is one of the fastest growing industries within our food system for some time now. And I think that's indicative of how many consumers are really wanting to move towards prevention rather than waiting towards treatment. And so within using fruits and vegetables, we're talking about using nutraceuticals and supplementation in the form of powders, in the form of extracts, in the form of juices, fresh pressed juices. And we have a bigger conversation that's happening here where food as medicine is not, it challenges us to not think in terms of allopathic medicine models where we think, I have this symptom, I need to treat it with, I have a headache, I'm going to take aspirin. Within food as medicine, we think, okay, how can I consistently support my body so that my immune system is chronically functioning as high as possible, which means that these fruits, herbs, spices, and funguses are not things that are chosen when we just have a headache or when we have a trouble sleeping. They're chosen regularly. And this means that we're shifting our food choices to an upper hand of 10 to 20 servings of fruits and vegetables and herbs and spices daily in order to support that immune system function at our optimal level. So that's going to help us with detoxification. That's going to help with mitochondrial function. That increases our alkalinity within our body so that we're reducing that acidity, the acidic load and the inflammation markers that are circulating. That's also going to help with cellular health. It also lengthens telomeres. And so you have longevity increases, but you also have individuals reporting a greater sense of well-being, right? And more energy, more focus, more alertness, and a decreased risk of all of the chronic diseases we've previously explored. So the first one I want to talk to you about is the brassica family. Brassicas are where we're going to find the cabbages and the kales and the broccolis and the Brussels sprouts and the cauliflowers. The phytochemicals found within this family are sulforaphane and glucosinolates, and then the phenolinics. And the brassica family has really been extensively studied for its role in prevention of cancers. It acts as a detoxifier. It helps to detoxify the cancer cells before we even get to promotion. And so you see the brassica family being rich with quercetin and camphorol, and these also are targeting inflammation reactions, so the infections, high blood pressure, diabetes, you have blood glucose. You see the detoxification happening with brassicas to help reduce cardiovascular disease risk, diabetes, type 2 diabetes risk. You also see a lot of research focusing predominantly on the use of brassicas for reducing prostate cancer and breast cancer. There's a lot of research that's also been coming out within the brassica family on its reduction of lung cancers. And that really relates to the phytochemicals found within the brassica family. The next family I want to talk to you about is the legumes. So beans and lentils. And by far, this is another one of those. If you said, hey, what is the takeaway? Legumes, beans and lentils, and turmeric, and a variety of elderberry and herbs are going to be your major takeaways. Legumes have been shown that when we eat them regularly, typically daily, it increases longevity, increases telomere lengthening. And we see this happening within all the blue zones that have been studied worldwide, where we have people living late into their 90s, early 100s, late 110s. And that the commonality here is that they have been consuming lots of beans and legumes. The reason why the beans and the legumes are so important and impactful is because they have saponins in them, they have phenolic compounds in them, they have lectins in them, and they change peptides, but also because they're rich in fiber, they're rich in protein, they are rich in carbohydrates, they carry these phytochemical concentrations with them, and they help within reducing inflammation by helping detoxification. So they're really working on the gut microbiome, and they're impacting this gut-brain axis by delivering prebiotics and probiotics in the form of their soluble and insoluble fibers. So therefore, we're seeing a reduction in cardiovascular disease. We see a reduction in LDL levels with people that are consuming legumes regularly. You see this detoxification happening. You also see blood glucose stabilization happening when you have people consuming legumes daily. There's weight loss because of the fiber. And the thing with beans and legumes is that you can hide them pretty easily. I think that's where we get into this conversation within food as medicine, is how do I change my diet in a way that makes sense? So it's not like, let me sit down and eat 20 servings of fruits and vegetables. How the heck am I ever going to do that? It is, okay, well, I'm making a smoothie. Could I add some orange lentils into it? Could I add some beans into it, or garbanzo beans or chickpeas, and you'll never know the difference. If you're making a meatloaf, how do you add those things into it and increase the amount of food servings, your fruits and vegetable servings that you're having, without becoming daunted by applying all of these principles? The next one I want to talk about is spirulina. Spirulina falls under the category of a sea algae. Sea algae are rich in protein, they're rich in B vitamins, so they're going to help us on a mitochondrial level and a cellular response level with increasing energy. They are extremely alkaline. In fact, they're one of the most alkaline rich foods that we have in the world. They are filled with chlorophyll, and they're extremely anti-inflammatory. They help with reducing interleukin 6, and they also help with reducing cytokine production from inflammatory markers. So they also will inhibit histamine reaction. So these are spirulina and chlorella as a sea algae is extremely important for anybody that's suffering from any type of allergic reaction. They help with chronic fatigue, and they also help with autoimmune responses. And so spirulina is being studied for people that are suffering from multiple sclerosis, from fibromyalgia, from chronic fatigue syndrome. You have spirulina being really rich in probiotics as well. So it's going to help with that gut brain axis, but also restabilizing the gut and the gut microbiome and the mucosal layer. And so you see leaky gut reduction happening there. And that leaky gut syndrome is often indicative of, as a precursor of a lot of the chronic diseases we're currently looking at. So spirulina is going to help target the integrity of the gut microbiome. And it also helps with reducing NK, natural killer cells. It's going to act as an antiviral, and it helps with increasing HDL levels for healthy lipoproteins, and will reduce cholesterol. It helps with stabilization of blood glucose levels, and it also helps with detoxification and working against those cancer cell production. So spirulina and chlorella are definitely one of those functional foods that should be added really regularly into the body to help with detoxification and alkalinity and supporting of the immune system. Additionally, you have berries, and the world of berries is probably one of the biggest places to contribute to your well-being outside of the legumes. So with berries, we have the largest concentration of flavonoids and polyphenols found within these foods. With them, you see anthocyanins, proanthocyanins as phytochemicals. These are the phytochemicals that we know will target Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. They are the ones that are helping with the gut microbiome and gut brain axis. They're helping support memory. They help with neurotransmitter production. They are increasing insulin sensitivity. So you see impacts upon type 2 diabetics. You have a lot of fiber found in these berries. And so you see a reduction in constipation. You see a reduction in type 2 diabetes. You see a decrease in cholesterol and LDL levels. You also see cancer protection happening within the phytochemicals found within berries. And they act as an anti-inflammatory as well. And so they're really helping with the functional level of mitochondrial. You see with the ORAC values and the antioxidant values that when we can ferment foods, this is another culinary medicine application, specifically berries. If we can drink fermented berries or eat fermented berries, their antioxidant levels increase through that fermentation process. And so that is another delivery mechanism for making sure that we're getting extremely high amounts of antioxidants in our systems at all times. Garlic is going to be one of those foods that we've used for centuries for supporting the body, and it helps with reducing blood pressure, and it has sulforaphane in it and flavonoids in it. It's going to help with bone health, and it helps with absorption of vitamin D and production of vitamin D and calcium. It also helps with memory and diabetes. I want to spend, I know I'm nearing the end of my time, so I want to fast forward a little bit and get into one of the newest areas of the research, which is mushrooms. And mushrooms are really being extensively studied right now for numerous reasons within food as medicine. So you have ergothioneine in them, which is the phytochemical found in mushrooms. This ergothioneine has been shown to help with production of telomere lengthening. It helps with longevity. It helps with immune system health. They are rich in protein. There's brain support with them. There's vitamin D, and they are rich in prebiotics and probiotics. So they're helping support this gut brain axis, which we know from the research that what's happening in our guts, or when the gut microbiome has become degraded or has been impacted by inflammatory reactions or inflammatory nutritional choices repeatedly, that's what increases this chronic disease risk and also increases chronic inflammatory markers circulating in our systems. So we have ergothioneine found within mushrooms, and it's really high on ORAC values, having high amounts of antioxidants. It's supporting the mitochondrial function. And so there's a couple of mushrooms that I just want to make sure that we check in about. And Mataki is one of them. And so Mataki is going to be filled with beta-glucan, which is what most of these mushrooms are filled with. They act as adaptogenics. So they're helping support our body in its ability to adapt to stressors and inflammation. They help with immune modulation, so supporting the immune system. They also will work, Mataki is being researched for prostate cancer, for digestion within prebiotic concentrations. It has been studied for AIDS patients and helping them recover as well as supporting their immune system so there is not a relapse. There is research that's looking at using Mataki to reduce high blood pressure, as well as to supporting insulin resistance for those suffering from type 2 diabetes. The thing with mushrooms is that we can consume them via dried mushrooms, fresh mushrooms, or you're seeing the food processing industry really shift into powders and mushroom powders. If you're lucky enough to live in an area, you can actually forage mushrooms as well. And so there are differences between the ORAC values based upon how they are produced and how they are consumed, whether they are uh, boiled in hot water, if they've been put into an oil extraction or an alcohol extraction, if they have been powdered. All of these variables will impact antioxidant load, but the takeaway from all of them is that you're going to get a rich source in protein and B vitamins, and so energy and mitochondrial function, and this beta-glucan or ergothioneine. You have shiitakes, which help with liver detoxification. They also help with reducing LDL levels, and they have been shown to reduce cardiovascular disease risk. They are rich in prebiotics and probiotics. There's several research studies that are looking at supplementation of shiitakes for reducing obesity, which we know correlates with cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. There is research that looks at using shiitakes for reduction of colon cancer, and it helps to protect against DNA damaging. So the mushroom realm, the fungus realm, is really important because it's going straight to the heart of that detoxification and mitochondrial function. The star, I guess, if you had to pick one of the mushrooms, would probably be your reishi mushrooms. And it's called the queen of the mushrooms. And it's noted in traditional Chinese medicine as being used as early as 206 BC. It has helped with fatigue, it helps with hormone balance, and it helps with protection of leaky gut syndrome, which we know is often a precursor of chronic disease risk, and it helps support longevity. I'm going to stop presenting about fruits and vegetables at this point in time to just tie it all together and give you guys a couple of minutes to ask some questions. The thing about what I'm presenting is that there's so much research and so much literature that shows that each of these fruits and vegetables, herbs and spices and funguses have their specific purposes to different symptomologies found within a chronic disease risk. That makes them really important, right? And we can apply food as medicine really within our kitchens and within our clients and within the patients that we're treating. But we cannot use food as medicine without understanding that it's part of a larger context, which is lifestyle medicine. That if we're not interacting with our food from a space of gratitude or connection and connecting with the earth and where it's coming from, or connecting with our family members and our loved ones as we're eating it and moving our bodies, food as medicine can only go so far. Food as medicine is not intended to be used as a singular treatment. It's meant to be used in conjunction with different modalities that are really helping to enhance connection, enhance deep breathing and presence practices, and reduce the stress load of our bodies by altering how we are responding and the lifestyle choices that we're making. I will leave that. And I think the evidence of this is that you see this happening within the blue zones. Here are my references, and I will leave that for the presentation. And then there's my contact information. I want to make sure I get to the questions. Processing affects the medicine foods into carcinogens. Processing can impact the antioxidant loads of fruits and vegetables, especially if we're moving from a raw vegetable to a powdered vegetable. Freeze drying changes, heating, microwaving, all of those things will impact the ORAC value and the antioxidant loads. Lemon and citrus fruit on an empty stomach, it depends on the nature and the integrity of the gut microbiome already, because the acidic load can, if there's too much acidity within the gut microbiome at that point in time, it can be too much for somebody to consume. And so typically we use lemon and citrus and peels because it acts as an amplifier for the fruits and the vitamins and minerals and the phytochemicals that are found within those fruits and vegetables. And so it can be useful to just start with a little bit. And this is the same philosophy as if you were using an apple cider vinegar for somebody that had GERD or irritable bowel syndrome, where you start with just a little bit and you just see how your body responds. That's really the point of individualized nutrition. Milk is not necessary in our diet at all. And I think that that's a whole other lecture that I could definitely jump on the bandwagon for. Papaya is wonderful, especially for its ability to help with the gut microbiome. It delivers prebiotics and probiotics. It helps with act as an anti-inflammatory. And there's a lot of really interesting research coming out around papaya for topical application, skin application, for wound healing and cellular regeneration. Yeah. I will stop my share and see if there's anything else. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for your time today. Thank you.